My name's Kevin Galligan, technology partner at TouchLab. I'm going to talk about AI, how it will change mobile. If you want the more realistic answer, it's how it might change mobile, but you know that doesn't sell, so I put the big version up there. So a bit about me. I've been doing Android since before there were phones, and started TouchLab 2010, 2011. At the time, everything was iOS ports. This becomes important later in the talk. Kotlin Foundation Ecosystem Committee, Android GDE, lots of KMP, yada, yada, yada. If you know who I am, it might be because of the KMP stuff that I've been talking about forever. So we're at a native mobile conference, and I say that because it kind of gives a certain impression of what you think the world of mobile is, or maybe how you think it should be done, or whatever. And certainly a lot of mobile is done with native technologies. I mean, it's not like it's gone away or anything like that. But if you really go and talk to people who are not in this world, or you go talk to people who are building mobile but aren't at like huge companies building mobile, startups, whatever, new products, they're generally not thinking about native at all, or if they are, it's like, you know, gee, that'd be nice, but like that's not what we would do now. Sometimes people look at me like, you still do that? Why should I be doing, you know, Flutter, React Native, or whatever? And you know, the conversations are kind of like this, where it's just it's like it's not even something that's seriously considered. So I gave a talk, the keynote here last year, no, not here, but droidcon New York, and it talked more about the situation of like where native mobile has like come from and where it is now, and it's like big apps have gotten much bigger. They're much more complicated things to build. The teams are much larger, much more mission critical, and absolutely essential for those big apps out in the world. But newer, smaller apps just like aren't native, right? And that's not universal, of course. Some things, you know, you'll find exceptions to every rule, but it's just like that's like the assumption at this point, right? And the native dev community doesn't feel proportionally like it's smaller or bigger. It's kind of been in this weird stasis point where it's just shifted in the nature of what it's done. But like native mobile hasn't grown proportionally to the growth of importance for mobile in general. Like mobile is like essential, but the point of the intro of the keynote last year was that native mobile's not in the same way that mobile is, right? So like my obsession for a decade, I mean, this was 2017, but that was because that's the earliest slide I could find without spending hours going through old files and stuff, has been like the inefficiency and ways to make that less inefficient for native mobile development. And a lot of that was informed because from 2010 until 2013, 14, almost everything that TouchLab did was take this iPhone app and make it work in Android. So it's like a visceral, deep understanding of just how like seemingly different these things are and how much they are not in reality. And like, it's an interesting thing to point out. We had Room working on iPhone in 2017. We were shipping apps, and it's really cool that Room is on KMP in 2024, 2025. But I mean, this technology's been there forever, and it's the thing that we've been focused on, right? And like 2018, we went all in on KMP because J2OHCC was going nowhere and nobody cared. So that's what we've been doing since. And it's been like a really interesting thing. I mean, on the ecosystem committee, this is what I focus on. What's going on? And it's growing, but there are really serious problems with adoption at scale, adoption with existing teams, with large teams. And this is what I've been like focused on for the last few years. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Like there's technical reasons and there's marketing reasons. But like I really think one of the reasons that's like not really acknowledged or understood is the difficulty of devs to be productive and of editing efficiently both platforms on a regular basis. And I point out that like we've had this bipolar world of native mobile platforms for like almost 17 years, and the majority of native mobile teams are still platform specialists. And that's the whole time people saying, hey, we should break down the silos and we should merge the teams, and you can see how that would be more efficient if you had the same engineers working on the same stuff. But that's not how it works. Why? You could spend a lot of time discussing that. Management level folks are like, well, we just need more training, or they're just brand loyal, as if that explains 17 years of the entire industry just doing that. My argument is like, well, maybe it's because specialists exist for the same reasons specialists exist in any industry. Because the practice and the time it takes and the knowledge to retain expertise in this one field, it's like maybe a limit of expertise, right? My argument is kind of boiled down to like, we wouldn't have cardiologists if we didn't need them. So at least you should be concerned about just dismissing that impact if you're planning on making changes to your team. So I think there are mitigations. I think there's ways to do that, but that's not what this talk is about. And most people don't like to hear the things I'm talking about that way because they're like not selling their KMP. They're telling you what has to get fixed, and that's not a good message. We still love KMP. It was pointed out during my trial that it sounds like I've just given up. That's not the case at all. I actually had a whole section in here on KMP and AI, and then a whole section on something else, and they're like, your talk's great, but it's 3 talks. I'm like, okay. So I cut that out. There's a lot you can do with KMP and AI. That's not what we're talking about. So I kind of took like a KMP sabbatical, just to like, all right, I've said a lot of stuff about this. I'm taking a break. And like, what's going on with AI? Because going back like late last year, I was kind of like, I think what a lot of people, which is like, yeah, it's interesting, but this is all slop and hype, and it's Silicon Valley BS, right? What's going on, though? We got to see what's happening. And a lot. Hold on, let me, yeah, never mind the fact that it's so hot. I also got a nice little summer cold right at the beginning of the week. So, it's not COVID, I've been testing. We have a lot of polarized opinions. Do you know what I mean? So if you go out there and listen to people, it ranges from devs are going away, right? I would not take coding right now if I was anybody, all the way down to this is crap and hype, or worse, like you're just burning the planet, stop it. It's all over the map, and then you get things like this, which is 3 to 6 months, 90% of code, AI generated. Now, for a Silicon Valley CEO, I'm not really picking on him, I think he's actually a decent guy. That's a crazy statement, especially considering like, that was 3 months ago he said that. TikTok, right? But that's what these people say. That's how Silicon Valley works. And if you follow the trend line of like progression going back a few years and it just kept doing that, you know, well, maybe you would be there. Maybe we are going to be, maybe we will have flying cars, 4 decades ago. But I spent a lot of time, I've been living inside these things for the last at least 6 months, and before that playing around with them. And it's like devs are the ones that get the most out of this, not the other way around. Because there's just so much that like these tools can do, but they really can't do what a dev does, like what the real job is at scale. It's just not something that works out really well. It's a much longer explanation, and this talk isn't really about that either. But like, first of all, a lot of people, it's a range of like, you've been doing this for a while, you know all these details, all the way down to this is slop, but I came to hear this because Kevin gives weird talks, right? So I'm going to give the intro of what these tools are. I mean, chat's obvious. You open a window, you talk to it, it tells you things back. Autocomplete, everyone's experienced because new versions of Android Studio and IntelliJ usually add the autocomplete thing on, which I turn off immediately because all it does is break my train of thought, and it's usually wrong. It's like when someone finishes your sentences. If they're right, it's like, oh wow, we're bonding. But when they're wrong all the time, it's like, all right, shut up. So that's not what we're talking about. We're really talking about agents. Agents are like relatively new coding agents, not general agents. But this is where things are really, really taking off and can do some crazy things. So native mobile has had an AI lag. We are essentially locked into 2 IDEs, Android Studio and Xcode. And that's kind of unique if you think about the rest of the developer world. And it's not like we're not going to see these tools coming. In fact, when I pitched this talk, there were far fewer Android Studio agent options than there are today. Xcode's a different story because you can't do shit with Xcode. It's terrible. But I'm not too worried about that. Funny thing, the agents themselves don't care what IDE you're in. But there's that. So it's just like it takes a while for stuff to get here, but it's coming. Now it's just that Android Studio, it's a smaller market, so they're not going to start there as far as the tool makers, but they're coming. And then it's also like the model support for Kotlin and Swift, I would not say was as good as the model support for like other languages up until recently. That's the way it seemed anyway. And then there's also a lot of, again, native mobile is usually with larger teams, larger code bases, orgs that take longer to move. So it's just something that's not going to enter into this world as quickly as it will some others, right? This sort of explains the whole lag. But it's coming, and it's coming pretty fast. By the way, I did not see this coming, that the language server profile, whatever, yeah, you know what I'm saying? And VS Code plugin for Kotlin was just wild. And I kind of know why it happened, which is the hush hush thing. It's a good story. We're not talking about it. But it's amazing. I don't expect the experience to be any good. I really love IntelliJ and Android Studio. But what this opens up as far as compatibility with the rest of the software industry is going to be very interesting. So briefly, this explanation of what these things actually are, because I think that there's this lack of understanding and clarity, and there's a lot of complexity, and I don't agree that it's really that complex. So you have this thing that sits out in the ether, the big model. You hear about the models. They're sitting there doing nothing. I mean, they're taking up huge amounts of memory and whatever, but they're not doing anything right now. You could run one on your local machine. You're not running one of these big models on your local machine, not even close. But things are going to change. It's going to be bigger models than smaller machines. That's what's happening. That's why NVIDIA is worth $3 trillion. Your agent, or whatever you're doing, is on your computer, right? This thing sits there, and what you do is you type some stuff into your agent, and then like that usually gets padded with some extra stuff, and then it gets sent as text or tokens more appropriately to the model. And it is important to understand like that is the entirety of the model's universe. That's what it gets. And then if it thinks or it just shoves it through a digital Play-Doh extruder, however you want to think about how LLMs work, it sends you something back. That comes back to the thing that you're talking into. It might take some metadata off and it just shows you the response. That's chat. That is the entirety conceptually of what chat is and how it works. It's a little more complicated, but not really. So what an agent is, and you hear a lot about agents. All an agent is it says, hey, by the way, LLM, I have some tools you can run, and here's how you can tell me to run them on your behalf. And then that message gets sent with your message to the model, and it might send back a message to show you, or it might send back, hey, go read this file. And the agent reads that, and then directly goes back. So if you're using an agent, you see it thinking or whatever it's doing, it's because they're going back and forth and doing stuff. That is entirely how that works. That's what an agent is, right? I mean, yes, it's way more complicated in detail, but conceptually, that's all. By the way, what is MCP, which you've probably heard of if you don't know what that is? It's like an agent with its tools, except you can give it whatever tools you want. And they're actually fairly easy for you to write if you want to, and there are like an explosion of MCP tools coming out right now. So here we got Figma, and I send something there, and it sends back Figma details of some screen, right? And I've used this to create, like for our company website, I'm like, hey, create a component from this Figma design. And it's never perfect, but it's almost perfect. Like you just change some of the padding and stuff. It's super fast. It's really interesting. It's crazy what you can do with these. We're already doing like wild stuff. MCP is awesome, but it's real simple. It's just an agent with its tools and your tools, whatever tools you want. Also be careful because the tool is going to run anything it wants on your machine. So use your best judgment about what you do with that. So a coding agent is conceptually very simple, right? Read and write files, search files, terminal commands. You essentially tell the LLM, you can do this on my machine, and it asks the agent to do those things and sends it back. You could write that in a few hundred lines of code. We have a simple one in the tool we're building, but we wouldn't possibly use it for any real work, just for basics. In practice, not so much. Like, do I think Cursor is actually worth $9 billion? I don't know, but it definitely means the agent that's in there is more complicated than one I wrote with a few hundred lines. Like, it does a lot of things that are pretty important. So agents, you have to think of them as the LLM's IDE, right? And then when you think of it that way, we're barely 2 years in technically to coding agents and really like a year. And think about how long it took IDEs for people to evolve. Like if you were a year after coding started, what do you think the coding experience looked like? That's how early we are, and that's how much better these things are going to get. So if you think about an IDE, there's a lot of patterns that have developed for general IDE, and then something like Android Studio also has a ton of Android-specific stuff built into it. And just in this window, there's a bunch of visual stuff and a bunch of things that are built under the hood. Never mind Git-related things and diffs and automatic refactorings. This is what doesn't exist for an LLM right now. So my analogy that I try to give to people is, imagine that you just landed a first job or new job at some place, and you expect to walk in and get your usual welcome thing, and you meet everybody and all that bullshit. None of that. You just get sat down at a terminal, and then someone tells you you're going to get messages, text messages from a manager you're never going to meet. And they might be very detailed, they might be very vague, even like insulting and angry. And you're going to have to do those things. By the way, you don't have an IDE. All you have are terminal commands, and you have no idea what this code base looks like. And then every 20, 30 minutes, you're going to move to a different terminal, work on something entirely different, and you'll never work on this project again. That is what the experience for an LLM is like using an agent that doesn't have any extra tools in it. So they do really well considering all that. So it's pretty amazing they can get anything done at all if you watch what they do. And everything, though, is important to understand. It's all about context. So the more information you can give the LLM to do what you want it to do and not have to go figure out what you want to do, the better it's going to perform. It's better context, better result. So if you think about it like, people are like, well, they're not that good. They screw up my code. I'm like, if you type something like this, create a new entity in our data store for customer, then create a new repository to manage it. If that's all you've told it, it needs to go now like scan your files with terminal commands. But it also kind of gets in trouble if it does it too much. So they minimize it and they try to guess. So they guess a bunch of shit. Imagine what you're likely to get out of that. They're also non-deterministic. So sometimes it'll do a lot of prep work and sometimes it'll just guess. They're weird, I will say that. But if you type in like, okay, create that, but our data store's room, here's where it is, here's our pattern, and here's our repository pattern, here's generally where we store them, what we name them, and by the way, here's all the fields that should be in customer. Like if you give it more information, it'll do better. And really what you should have already done is create a whole context file that explains all these patterns and have examples that exist. And if you have all that stuff, you'd be surprised how good these things can actually do. Context window is something you've probably heard, and it just means how much stuff can you give it. Like if you give it one byte more than this, they're like, nah. So Sonnet had like 3.5 at 200,000 context window, which was like really, whoa, that's huge at the time. And then same for Sonnet 4. And then Gemini 2.5, GPT 4.1, 1 million. And if you think about a token is somewhere between a character and a word. I don't want to get into what that means, but it's a lot, okay? Like you could shove a lot of code in there, you can do all this stuff, but it's interesting. It's also not how they work. You can't just use 999,000 of the context window with code and expect it to have any remote whatever. After a certain point, they start to act really weird. So again, so much about this is just not easy to know because it's not exact. So you don't want to be stuffing the context window unnecessarily. The best practice really is like a clear and comprehensive amount of information, trying to guess what everything that it's going to need up front, or at least as much as you can, but just enough. Because extraneous information is just going to be distracting and potentially make things not go the way you want. I don't know how far we're actually into time because I did start a little late. But one of the things I like to talk about, especially like when our team, they're like, this is the same kind of reactions. They weren't into AI. And everyone I feel like that's sort of non-tech explains like, well, it helps you write tests and it helps you with boilerplate. I'm like, yeah, there's a ton of shit that already does that. I usually bring up interesting things that you maybe wouldn't think of, right? So like open source docs or closed source docs, whatever. It's like everyone hates docs. Maybe some of you love docs. You are definitely unique. You can say, go review the code base, find the examples in docs, and make sure that they're up to date, and check the versions. Like, they're smart enough to go do that, and then fix them, or tell you what should be fixed. You can write entire code-based docs. Just give it some instructions. Like, they'll do a pretty good job, and they'll do it rather fast. I think we're into like a new world of open source documentation. You can do things like look at this PR and tell me if it generally follows our architectural guidelines, and if it doesn't, point out where it does not and why. Like, they're not perfect, but you'd be surprised how good you can get that kind of stuff. Or like one of the ones I actually love to watch happen, if you have a big old code base that people aren't doing a really good job cleaning up, you'll see comments like to do this for things that have already been to done 3 years ago. And it's just, or comments that are like, you know, calling set name, and then there's a comment that's like sets name. Like, you can tell it, get rid of obvious comments, check comments for staleness. And they're generally smart enough to figure that out. It's just all this kind of stuff that you wouldn't think of that's also super tedious and you can do at super scale. But you can do a lot more than that. But I'm just saying that you'd be surprised when you get done. One thing that's particularly important, you can like productively edit code in unfamiliar platforms. So if you don't know Rust really well and you want to go poke around a Rust code base, guess what? Like, you can, and you can edit stuff and it goes pretty well. So we'll get back to this. Agents for Android Studio. Android actually has a new agent. They announced it at Google I/O. There are new things coming in it. The one they showed at Google I/O is different in a way that I won't explain, but I thought it was rather interesting. The one they released doesn't have this feature yet, but we'll see. There's Firebender, which is like a startup that's trying to build an agent for, and not trying, they have a product. And Copilot, I'm not sure if there's actually IntelliJ family yet, but it's in VS Code. It'll be there eventually. Again, this is one of those things where it just kind of lags. Windsurf, Claude Code, sort of. It's in a terminal, but it talks to the IDE. Junie's not in Android Studio, I don't think, yet, but it's in IntelliJ, and I do half my Android editing in IntelliJ anyway. And then there's the other agents, which is a much bigger world. The closed source, Cursor, I think everybody, my dad's probably heard of Cursor. Claude Code again, that's actually become pretty popular. Windsurf, they might get bought by OpenAI, or they have been, I don't know, for $3 billion of paper money. That's wild. And then all the open source ones, and there are many of these. Klein, Goose from Block, those are our best, you know, community friends from Block Square. Rue, which is actually the one I use most of the time now. Aider, which I don't know, it's popular, but I don't kind of get it, but that's all. And there's like endless other ones I see all the time. There's no time to try all of them. I do want to take a minute and talk about the excitement around these things and what's happening in the open source world, because it kind of blew my mind, and I've got some charts. So here are the open source agents that I put up here for comparison. Aider is the one that's been around for 2 years, but that one started as more of a chat, and it kind of shifted to agent like a year ago. The rest of these are less than a year old if you look at the dates, which is kind of crazy considering how big they are. And you don't really get a sense for the scale of these until you put them next to something else. That's Kotlin, the entire Kotlin platform, right? That is the timeline, that's the GitHub stars. That is what that is compared relative to the agent tools open source that are good or sort of okay and around for less than a year. I also threw on there something that really blew my mind. That's LangChain. That is a library for people to build AI agents. A library. And it's just absolutely towering over so much of the rest of like the things that we're used to. That is TypeScript. And the only way I can explain how much energy and what's going on is the fact that it's not like an individual part of the dev universe decided to focus on this. It's like the entire open source universe is like, we don't know how these things work, and we definitely want to know how they work. So we're going to take the toaster apart together all at the same time. And it's like, there's just so much energy. It's crazy. GitHub stars aren't everything, but they're not nothing, right? Like, I think proprietary agents, like the Cursors of the world, are really going to have to do some crazy stuff with all that $900 million they got in cash or whatever, because these open source agents are catching up super fast. Like, they've been progressing and really, really doing a lot of stuff very quickly. So we'll see how it goes. Again, Rue is mostly what I currently use. I don't understand their business model, but it's open source and they got a ton of effort going into it. So it's pretty interesting. Goose is fun too, although it is in Rust, which I didn't understand. But that's a whole different discussion. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I'm talking about mobile specifically. What is special about mobile? And I have some thoughts on that. So again, as a bit of a reminder, coding agents are very good at some specific things. And one of them is converting code from one platform to another, right? In a creative way, not like a transpiler. So if you take some code and you paste it into your chat and say, make this other thing of the code, you'd be kind of amazed at what they can do. And the other thing that they can do really well, again, is allow developers to be productive in platforms they are unfamiliar with. So I've been writing a lot of TypeScript lately. It's not like I can't stumble around TypeScript, but I'm certainly not fluent in it. I'm not happy about it. I don't really love TypeScript, but there's reasons we're doing that. I'm far more productive in it with this than without. So how might this apply to mobile? So this kind of gets back to my obsession for the last decade. Like, native mobile, it's essentially two apps like doing the same thing. You know what I mean? If you step back, blur your eyes a bit, these are like the same thing, logically, whatever. And then they're usually built by separate teams of platform specialists. And if you think about like the inherent inefficiencies and how that works. And converting code, unfamiliar platform productivity, it can change how teams are structured and how apps are built. And I can't tell you exactly right now how that might happen. I mean, that's not really how this stuff works. You see how this goes, how far it goes, what impact it has, what impact it does not have. Like, I've been doing this long enough to know that it may not, nothing may happen, I don't know. But you know, these calls to merge teams and break silos. Again, one of the big problems with that is it's so difficult to maintain expertise in two things at once. This changes that picture somewhat, right? It can directly impact those causes of those issues. And I think it will be furthered by if you change the app structure. Like, if you have things that are more parallel, it's a lot easier for something to analyze them as opposed to having them in all different places. But I don't know, and I don't know how long it'll take, but if you think about what might happen. And then even if you're not adopting AI in some grand way, you can think about how this might reduce dev issues, right? So you can like essentially say, okay, there's an Android feature that was implemented, I'm gonna do the iOS one, and it can give you like a breakdown of the entire structure of what was done in Android, and then maybe it gives you a mock version of what it might look like in Swift, and then maybe you do your version in Swift and it analyzes both and tells you maybe there's a feature you're missing or some edge case that you're missing, right? Like, that's the kind of thing that these things can do very, very well. And so even if you're not using it to make code in any way, just the analysis and helping things happen goes a long way. You could even say, I want to review the Android code, but show it to me as Swift. Like, you could do that kind of stuff. It's wild. What is this? This is the big PR squash merge commit that we had on an Android project recently. It is almost 100,000 lines of adding. There's almost 25,000 removing. That's a different discussion. The Tibble's Android port. So we had an old client come up and say, look, we have this Android app. It's been going through iterations for years. There's a mix of things. It's a white label thing. It's kind of, I wouldn't say all over the place. They had an old Android app that hasn't compiled in 3 years, far less features, all this. And they estimated it's going to take 6 to 12 months for our old dev, if we got that person back, to come in and bring this up to basically good enough version to release. But they couldn't really afford a retail shop for 6 to 12 months. And I was like, we're in the middle of experimenting with doing some of this crazy stuff. I'm like, get that project. And this is our new thing. We're going to experiment with this. And it took 6 weeks with a restart a couple weeks in, because again, this is primarily a learning experience for us. It was to get the client over the hump. But that change, the 100,000 lines, was mostly automated, one dev, about 4 weeks, again with restarts and lots of experiments. It was a mix of UIKit and Swift UI, and going to all compose on Android, a mix of async patterns in iOS, all the code routines, core data to room, which you'd be surprised how different and weird that conversion can be, and lots of legacy mixed patterns. Basically, like most big apps out there where they don't have time to go back and fix debt, it was a big fucking mess. And I mean, that's unkind, but they tried to do well, and then things got worse and worse over time. But this is what we did, and we needed to do this to prove that you could do this in something that wasn't simple, that wasn't an example app, because you can't test scale in a lab. So again, going back to, like, if you take some code, in this case, Swift UI, copy it, paste it into your chat window, and say, show me this in Compose, you'd be amazed at how well it can do this. Don't do this with an agent, a coding agent, because then it'll try to find all these things, and if it can't find them, it'll try to create all these things. Do it in chat, then it'll just guess. But the next thing that's interesting is you can do this kind of thing in a small app very easily, right? So this is something I did. I went and took our camp kit, which is a KMP sample, and I just said, make me a Flutter sample. And I had to, like, correct a couple things because it was going to do something that was overly complicated I didn't want, but that's all I did. And the hardest part about this was I had to wait for 15 minutes and not do anything on my computer while it recorded, so I was bored, essentially. And you watch it go through, and they do things, and then they have to fix a couple things, and that's it. I didn't touch any code. I don't know how to make a Flutter app. That happened without any intervention. But it's one screen. It's one feature. It's 547 lines of Kotlin, basic dependencies. There's no legacy. There's no conflicting weird examples of patterns. It's the simplest possible thing. That is not going to work with anything above that kind of scale, right? And then going back to the, like, productive with unfamiliar environments, I do want to talk about it just a bit more. Like, it's amazing how much you can do with that, right? Again, so Goose, which is Block's agent, it's written in Rust, which I don't understand why. They don't really need the performance. But I really wanted to poke around with that, but I don't know. I did a tutorial like 4 years ago, and I spent like 15 minutes on it. I don't know shit about Rust. And if you think about before this, you'd have to go do a tutorial and read syntax, and then, like, all this stuff. You're talking about hours just to get in there and, like, tweak things. You just open it up, open an agent, and say, I want to find the feature that does this, or explain the architecture to me. Okay, I found this. I would like it to actually try to do this. And as somebody that's a good developer, I think I'm a good developer, I can read changes in languages and understand them better than I can write them, right? So that's important to understand, right? And the think about that, though, with something like Swift and Kotlin. Like, if you're an Android developer, you generally know a pretty good sense of how iOS works, but you're not going to be writing professional-level production Swift code every day, and vice versa. If these tools know these good patterns and you have clear patterns in your code base, using them together gives you a lot of that skill that you can't spend time maintaining all the time, right? So if you think about it that way. So, you know, what does that imply? Well, we have this on our website now because I believe it, especially after our experience, and if we're using KMP, everything together. Like, I think we can make native apps with the efficiency of cross-platform apps. Full stop. Like, I'm not going to caveat that in any way. I mean, I will in a second. But, you know, it depends on what you're building and how and all that kind of stuff. But, like, for us, like, we're experienced with KMP to a degree that I couldn't, is unique. And, like, we just did this with a whole app without KMP or anything in there, and we're doing a ton of experiments. I'm about to show you a tool. Like, I think that our team can do this now. I think that the industry can do this not too far from now. And, you know, the pushback is like, well, but you get cross-platforms two for one. I'm like, no reasonable person would argue that you can make a cross-platform app in the same amount of time that you can make either native app. So you get some wiggle room. And the question is, how much is that wiggle room, and how much can you shrink the native follow-on time to? And I would argue quite a bit. And what does that do to this conversation, right? So, like, next year, if this word gets out, if these tools are really happening, if this is really going on in this world, like, well, maybe cross-platform isn't just the default option anymore. Is everyone going to change? Absolutely not. But maybe does this get, like, native back into places it is no longer is? I think so. I think it could. If you're a product person and you can have native for, like, the same cost without the native dev problems, like, most product people would prefer their product to be a good native app. So it changes that equation. It's very important. You cannot do this without structure. I cannot say that any better than that. That thing I did with the one prompt, again, the point was it was such a small app it could handle it. It cannot do that in anything larger than even not much bigger than that, right? And it's important to also point out, it's not just porting, but maintaining. You can port, but then if you have two separate apps, who gives a shit? you have the same old problem. Yeah, it speeds up the porting, but now you got a whole different problem. You have to be able to like essentially build on your primary platform and then maintain the platform that's sort of the follow one in a meaningful way. Being able to change two independently and keep those in sync, like I haven't tried to spend too much time on that yet. We'll probably get to after they get the one direction one figured out. But we're building a tool. Of course, we're building a tool. Everyone's building a tool, but it's kind of hard. Like, what's an agent? What's a tool? What's an agent tool? Like, the terminology just got pointed out in the feedback, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. We just have to bear with me. There's essentially a tool. There's a bunch of different agents, multi-agents, big term now, and then tools we give to agents and general coding agents that are purpose-built for the particular task. Don't worry about it because we're not going into that much detail. But essentially what this thing does is it does a broad analysis and breakdown of the project. And if you think about the spectrum of what projects might look like, I mean, you might have a really well-structured one with a lot of modules. You could have one with 2 modules. One of them has 3,000 files, and half of them are in the utils folder, right? Like, there's all kinds of crazy things that are going on out there. With the one we did, Tibbles, it was like I found out not too far in that there were a bunch of Swift files that were there but weren't in Xcode, so they weren't being compiled, but the analysis thing didn't know that, so I was like, forget about it. Anyway, the whole idea is that you are analyzing and breaking everything down and doing the analysis in advance and then building sort of a map that goes down from the structural to the conceptual. So you can think about it like this. It's a long explanation how this would work, and there's a lot that we're still trying to figure out and experiment with because, again, if the module has 10 files, you don't need to do that much. If it has 10,000, you have to break things down a little further, and it's using a combination of LLM intelligence and static analysis to try to do that in some predictable way. But if you can think about why, if you're looking here, there's a certain volume of information that this window is showing you, right? And then you go all the way into here. It's a different zoom level. And I know that this is US, New York, Manhattan, Upper East Side, 62nd Street. Like, I know that context. And then I can just look at this. I don't know what this street looks like in Baltimore. That doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to me right now. And that's the whole point of what this is. So when you're focusing on certain parts of this, you want to be immediately able to say, okay, I just want to know about this. Everything I need to know, and it's a whole lot less than everything. And sometimes you need to know about something over here. But when you're doing the thing here, but maybe you'd only need to know some of it and then just an overview of what these types are, but you don't need to see all the code, right? Like, the whole idea is to be able to quickly grab the information you need from the entire project. Then you need to map and plan. And why do you need to map and plan? Because you need to have these two different platforms, and they're not going to be exactly the same. Like, you want to allow these tools the flexibility to design the other platform in doing the same thing in a very similarly structured way, but allow it flexibility to express the platform in the ways that the platforms normally express. What I mean by that, like, you don't want a one-for-one declaration. Like, maybe Android has different DI structure, the UI, maybe it's one-to-one views, but how you get there, navigation, that's different. You need to be able to, like, conceptually map back and forth. So, okay, I'll try to speed it up. But it's lunchtime, it's all right. Sorry. That's what this thing is doing, and like, so the way that works essentially is, again, it's just more agents and specific tools and specific instructions going in and saying, okay, this maps to this maps to this maps to that. You need that plan both when you're converting the thing, because you need to know where it's coming from, but more importantly, when you change one, to be able to go back and say, I know what's changed, now where in this other thing that we've generated needs to look at this and change it as well. And it's absolutely critical, and you need to update as your time goes on. And then there's managed execution. I'm out of time, so I can't really talk about it too much, but managed execution, because you can't just start in the middle. You have to start in the bottom. And you have to build piece by piece, because just because you planned it doesn't mean that's the way it's going to actually execute it. So you need to make sure that that is kept up to date. And also, they hallucinate. They just do. They're kind of famous for it. So you need to, like, compile and build things and make sure as you're going that it's being built in a way that makes sense. And that means instead of your conceptual map and your logical map, you need to have a dependency first, bottom up map, right? So you start there. And it's also important, like, okay, maybe that's you want to build that, but it needs to do these two things. If those two things don't exist, the other thing LLMs do, their core nature is to build functional things. So they will start making placeholders and shit if it doesn't know where that is and that it exists. So it's imperative to make sure you have all this stuff, build it from the bottom up, do it incrementally, and all that requires static analysis and all kinds of stuff. I mean, this is all the things we're doing, right? So, and there's other tools in agent flows to get screens to match visually by using different tools like multimodal LLMs and all that kind of stuff. But we're kind of out of time. I'll just show you, like, it's not really pretty yet, but we actually are building this crazy tool, which does the analysis. This is now doing the mapping, and then I'll show you what the mapping looks like. It's sped up. LLM and agents are not necessarily fast. It's sped up like 2,000%. But then, yeah, you get this big map. It's a conceptual map. You can look at it. You can actually say, maybe we should change this and that, all that kind of stuff, and then you get a work schedule. Let's build this, and then let's try that, and then let's build this, and then let's try that. And this is all constructed that way. In no way is this automated. Like, you're not going to not have developers doing this. But it is doable. And we're trying to make it as automatable and as on rails as we can. And it's going to be a shitload of work. I'm not going to lie about that. But if this is something that sounds interesting, we're only doing this with clients and select partners. Certainly at the moment. I have no idea what's going to happen with this tool in the future. That is not determined. But if it's something you're interested, or you're very interested in this topic in general, I'm chatty. I love talking about this stuff. The AI stuff's actually a lot of fun. Please reach out. And then, you know, if you can find me on the Android ASG Slack or the Kotlin Slack or whatever, Blue Sky. You can find me on Twitter, but I don't really go there anymore. That's it. We got any, like, big questions? I don't know. We're out of time, though.